Most people tend to think of Super 8 film as a home movie gauge, father shooting films of the children as they're growing up. Well, that was my first experience and we'll come on to that. But for some of us, particularly during the late 80s and throughout the 90s and the early 2000s, Super 8 became the home cinema gauge of choice. And as you can see on here, I've got some of the best Super 8 films that were ever released. And some of the even better ones are on sort of library 1200 foot, 1600 foot reels here, and other earlier releases through the late 70s and early 80s on 400 foot and 200 foot reels. It really was an exciting hobby, and it is actually still around today, just. Right, before we start, the first thing I've got to say is I managed to lose a comment the other day. I've tried to respond to every comment that's come in, and it's been quite difficult at times because there was a period there I was getting over 30,000 views a day, so it was very hard to keep up with. But the comment that managed to disappear in front of my eyes started off saying about my Star Wars sweatshirt, which someone very much liked. I think it also mentioned some of the Super 8 releases like Silence of the Lambs. So I'm awfully sorry, but there was a troll who had posted a comment just in front of you, so I went down to that one. No one wants to see that sort of nonsense, so removed that and started reading your comment, whereupon both of them disappeared off the screen and then the troll reappeared. So I don't quite know what went wrong with YouTube there, but clearly something was awry. And the upshot is, I'm afraid I wasn't able to respond to your comment. I didn't even make a note of who the subscriber was, so please leave that comment again, or if any of you haven't had a reply from me, please give me a poke, because as I say, I have tried to reply to them all. Now, the first of the film gauges we'll go through, we'll be doing VistaVision a bit next with the Ten Commandments, but this one is Super 8, and now it's often confused with what is now known as regular 8 or standard 8, which was the first of the 8mm gauges, but 8mm has a 5mm picture area, and the other 3mm are taken up by the sprockets and the edges of the film where such things as a sound stripe will go. Super 8 reduced the size of the sprocket, so the side of the film and the sprocket only took up 2mm of the whole film area, meaning that we had a 6mm picture area, hence Super 8, similar to Super 35 when they increased the picture area of that. 8mm and Super 8 were primarily a home movie gauge. People think of it as father getting a cine camera so he can shoot videos of his children growing up. Well, that was indeed what it was first of all designed for, but of course it wasn't long before entrepreneurs and companies started bringing out home movies, and as time went on the Hollywood blockbusters started making appearances, but we'll come to that later. Now, my father did just this with Super 8, and this was the very first camera. Well, this was the camera he purchased. I think I was either 2 or 3 years old, and this was from Dixon's in Wood Green, and he can still remember going to purchase this camera. And there is in fact a cartridge in here. This was an Agfa Super 8 cartridge. Agfa did have a tendency to fade. It wasn't as good as Kodak's Kodachrome, which is actually a black and white process similar to Technicolor, and the colour goes in at the processing stage. I think it was 27 baths, 21 baths that processing went through, so proved to be uneconomic in the long run as sales plummeted due to sales of video cameras. But anyway, a superior format to the earliest video cameras, that's for sure. In fact, up until the mini DV cameras came out, Super 8 had the advantage. But anyway, not an awful lot to this camera. It's got no zoom, it's a fixed lens, and not even much in the way of exposure. Oh, there is an exposure there. But that was the camera my dad purchased to film my brother and I growing up, and he always tried to use Kodachrome because it was superior. And in fact, this is an extract from the first film that he shot when I was 2 or early 3 years old. So this is 1967, Brookman's Park in North London, and as you can see by the Kodachrome colour, this really could have been shot last week if it wasn't for the fashions. But this was what London really looked like in the 1960s. Now, it was a colourful park, and so it was perfectly suited to Kodachrome. And this is really what home movies are all about. It was to see your family, and at the time I didn't appreciate it. It was many years before I appreciated how valuable these things were. and today I do home video transfers here of all the cine gauges, and I've had some rather rare and important films go through here. A colleague of mine in the Triumph Car Clubs, his father actually had a 16mm camera, and in 1930 he went to the 24 Hours of Le Mans and also Brooklands and shot that track with the banking still in place, a very historic motor racing circuit as far as Britain is concerned. But I also do Standard 8 and Super 8, and indeed plenty of important Super 8 films have come through here, and really important to me doing these motoring documentaries, such as this historic Rover film shot in the Arctic Circle in Sweden, testing the forthcoming Rover 800. Now, a school friend of mine, Ian, who's still my best friend to this day, I don't see him very often, and even less so over this past year, but he got himself an exceptionally good Canon camera when we were old enough to afford these things for ourselves. He was still very young, but he didn't really get on with this camera, and the batteries were always going dead for whatever reason. But anyway, he gifted this to me, and we used this for the next 20 years or so, filmed all around the world with it. And in fact, one of my favourite places, Breckenridge in Colorado, which I really went to town filming that place because it is like an old western town. So one year I even invested in some very high-speed black and white film so I could shoot it at night. And it was a very grainy film, Kodak stock, but it did come out beautifully well. When it came back, I set that compiled film away, had it all sound striped, and dropped a stereo soundtrack on it. So it's a lovely souvenir of one of our many holidays skiing in Breckenridge, Colorado. Now, some of you will remember these Kodachrome boxes. I've never opened these. I got these towards the end of Kodachrome production and sadly ran out of things to film. But it was costing quite a lot of money then to have them processed, because the free processing had been shut by Kodak, and I was having to send these to Dwayne's lab in America, and it was the shipping really that killed it for me. But that lab, I believe, is still going, as are other labs around the world, and it's still possible to get Kodak film stock and possibly others and use your Super 8 camera. And this produces the most exquisite images. I don't know what the equivalent is in video terms, but Kodachrome was always estimated to be at least 600 lines, and because it's random grain, because it's film, they reckoned you could add 50% to that. So we're not far off Blu-ray quality with these, and the trouble is they are really just a single generation, one-shot film, and you can never repeat that quality from that master. Just like a genuine original camera negative, really. It seems that the best filmmakers in the world today all got started with Standard 8 or Super 8 as a hobby. And Steven Spielberg had loads of home movies that one day he thought, I've got to get these professionally transferred to video. So I suppose he wanted the convenience, once he was a bit older, of watching them on the television. A chap he contacted to transfer his films was a young man called J.J. Abrams. Some of you will know that name. Anyway, he did a film that I love a few years ago called Super 8, and I wouldn't say this was like my childhood because we didn't necessarily have aliens from outer space running around, but the youngsters making the films and seeing those Kodachrome boxes and the photo stores with all the Kodak material around, that was very similar to my childhood. And when I watched this film, I haven't watched it very often, but it takes you into that world, it takes you back in time, and for me it's like going back into a former life, and has some special memories for me. So I wondered at the time, if that film was successful enough, whether it would actually generate a resurgence in Super 8. And well, it looked for a while like it was going to do that. Now, Classic Home Cinema, who I'll hopefully come on to later, they issued the trailer it was on acetate film stock actually, on Super 8, which is a lovely souvenir of the film. And we even had some struck on polyester film, which were superior quality to the acetate. And for a while something seemed to happen. Kodak announced a new camera for Super 8, and it had the biggest names in the industry behind it, Spielberg and J.J. Abrams amongst them, Quentin Tarantino too. It turned out all these top filmmakers started out with Super 8 as a filmmaking hobby. And as they progressed into professional filmmaking and time went on, it became apparent to some of them that there was a struggle to get people properly trained up into being cameramen and all the important things like lighting. Because when you use just video, you just point and shoot and it's so much more sensitive. Whereas if you grew up using Super 8, you had an appreciation for what it took to get the best out of your film. And because it was generally just a 50-foot cartridge, which would run for about 2.5 minutes at 24 frames a second, or something over 3, 4, 18 frames a second, you had a better appreciation of what it took to make a good film. So it was felt that the skills were being lost and the knowledge on how to light a set, simple things like that. So these top filmmakers, they put their name to the promotion of a new forthcoming Super 8 camera. Sadly, it seems to have died. Nothing's been heard for a while, or at least I haven't heard anything. But this new Super 8 box, it had video technology within it, and there was an electronic viewfinder. The sound got written to an SD card each time you press the shutter, and when you sent your 50-foot cartridge away for processing, not only would you get back your 50-foot processed cartridge, or negative, whatever it was, but you would also get a video transfer of it, which you could download from the web direct from them, and marry up your soundtrack. So it was a really good idea that possibly would have generated a whole new generation of filmmakers. The projector I screened my father's first 50-foot Super 8 reel of us in the park is a standard Elmo GS1200. There are other very good brands of projector, there's Fumio and Bewley, but essentially Elmo was the mass market, a superior brand, and the GS1200 was top of the tree. If anyone's thinking about buying a projector today, possibly not the best one to start with because it is so electronic, so unless you know who to repair it and things like that, it could cause you some problems. However, I've got two other GS1200s, one of which has an HID lamp in it, which gives exceptionally bright images, but I'm not sure of the colour temperature of that lamp. It seems to wash the colour out a little. But the one I had done by Bill Parsons, projector repairman Supremo, he's semi-retired now sadly, but he did an HTI lamp conversion in that, and it was the first in the UK at the time. I believe there's another one now. But we did that primarily for the British Film Collectors Conventions, which I got involved in the early 90s. And it was due to those conventions really that I ended up getting more heavily involved in all things Super 8. And at those conventions, ultimately we had a 24-foot wide CinemaScope screen, and when we first unveiled the HTI, we put an extract from Terminator 2 on, and that really did look like it was something special. Now you have to put yourself in the place that this was before video projection really became acceptable for home use, or affordable even. And so to see something looking almost cinematic on a 24-foot wide screen from Super 8, which was a 6mm picture area, really was something special. So Super 8 really was the king of home cinema at that time, and it was a far cry really from the 70s when we had glossy professional magazines such as Filmmaking around, which told us how films were made. But my preferred title at that time was Movie Maker magazine, because in Movie Maker they tended to have packaged movies and reviews of packaged movies included, and that was always the section I went to first to see what the latest releases were, such as the 400-foot release of Alien and the 400-foot release of Superman. So Movie Maker was a hugely successful magazine, but ultimately video came along and people started making the switch thinking it's so much cheaper, but those first video cameras, complete with a box that you had to carry over your shoulder to do the recording, were quite ridiculous and no contest compared to Super 8 as far as I was concerned. But as a result of that video market, they tried to transform into making better movies, which incorporated the whole gamut of video and filmmaking on the home market. So during those times, the big dealer for packaged movies in Britain was Walton. Now this is their catalogue from 1969, and they had a wonderful catalogue, but up until the mid-1980s really, when the VHS market got going, Hollywood studios and major studios in Britain would not permit anyone to release a film full length on a home movie gauge. So even if you got rights to a feature as a company, you had to cut something like 20% of the running time out. So the theory goes it wouldn't adversely affect the takings at the box office when a film did a re-release at the cinema. I know it probably seems ridiculous today, but that was how it was. And that was why films such as Alien at the time were not released full length, because that would have adversely affected box office, or at least that was how it's perceived. But then there was the change when the VHS market and Betamax, I suppose, really got going. And a few years later, Duran Film Services in Dudley, West Midlands, they found themselves being the biggest Super 8 film distributor in the world. And this was their catalogue, I believe, from 1992. And what a catalogue. The number of titles in here, and by then they had already relaunched Super 8 in the late 1980s, and they had features in scope and stereo sound, and the quality by that time was unsurpassed. Amongst those early ones was the feature of Supergirl, which we did screen at the last BFCC, the last convention that we did, and that still looks sensational on the 24-foot screen. Now Duran, while they were around, they started issuing their own magazine. Making Better Movies went to the wall, and Duran had already started Film for the Collector, which was specifically for the package movies. But in the middle of this was Super 8 Film Review by Keith Wilton, and I ended up working with Keith for many years at the British Film Collectors Conventions, and indeed this is where my film reviews started, as I was soon cajoled into writing reviews of the latest Super 8 releases, package movies and full features, and so that taught me that I really had to scrutinise the pictures on screen and the sound in order to ascertain what was good, what was not so good, and what was exceptional. Good training actually for the new 4K markets today. But Film for the Collector unfortunately went when Duran went. But Phil Sheard and Denise Sheard at Classic Home Cinema, who are still going in Cleethorpes, they've got their shop there at the seaside, they reintroduced a slightly smaller version of Film for the Collector as Film Collector, and Super 8 Film Review is still to this day in the centre pages of this. It's not quite so big as it was, but for anyone who's thinking about getting into Super 8 today, and there are still the odd new releases coming out, if you're into this sort of thing or you want to get into it, it might be worth contacting Classic Home Cinema, because he has a massive supply of second-hand and new films. But there are other film dealers around as well, and one of those I've subscribed to for their bi-monthly lists is Independent 8. Now, his lists come out every 2 months, and I put them up on the web for him, actually on our British Film Collectors Convention website, bfcc.biz. And so, just like with Classic Home Cinema, Independent 8 is a smaller version. He doesn't have a shop, but there are always Super 8 projectors for sale there, plenty of films, and even though he doesn't tend to get second-hand features in like Phil Sheard does, there are still some gems on there. And for anyone, I think, who is looking to get into Super 8 today, a fairly budget projector to make a start, a few of the older films just to have something to run, but some more modern trailers, because I can guarantee you'll never get tired of watching those trailers. And indeed, I've got so many trailers in my collection. I've got them all joined together on big reels, and you can run them 20 minutes, half an hour at a time. Great fun. So anyway, I think that brings us to the end. I hope you enjoyed this look at Super 8. If you did, please give it a like and perhaps consider subscribing, so I'll carry on producing content like this in the future. Next up should be the 4K release of the Ten Commandments, which is another excuse to have a look at VistaVision. And as I said in the last video, I'm expecting that to be one of the best 4K releases thus far released, owing to its VistaVision format. Till the next time, bye bye for now.